The Ask the Experts platform is a monthly segment that offers an opportunity for Namibian journalists to engage noted experts in one-on-one discussions on the COVID-19 pandemic. Journalists get to pose questions to experts in various sectors to ensure that they are equipped with the necessary information to better inform their readers, listeners, and viewers. COVID-19 is our common enemy. Together, we can defeat it. Proudly brought to you by the Namibia Media Trust and the DW Academy.
Good morning to everybody, and welcome to another episode of Hashtag Ask the Experts, where journalists really get the opportunity to speak to experts directly concerning anything and everything COVID-19 related. Right, and this initiative is brought to you by the DW Academy as well as the Namibia Media Trust. So for all our viewers joining this morning, and also the participants here on Zoom, I'll just request that if you do have any questions this morning, please just filter them through in the either the little comment box, or alternatively, just raise your hand and you can then ask our experts this morning their questions directly. So our experts for today is Simone Fourie. Simone is a psychology student from UNAM. With her also we have David Bishop. Now David is a broadcast editor at Future Media. And then we have Jessé Strauss, who is a psychological counselor from Geluk Psychological Services, joining us as well. And then we have Selma Moses, who is our sign language interpreter this morning. So good morning, and thank you so much for joining us, everyone. Today's topic really, we will be discussing the impact of COVID-19, specifically on media personnel. All right, that's our topic of discussion for today. Simona, I'm going to start with you. I know that you're currently conducting a study that aims to investigate work stress and flourishing amongst media personnel during COVID-19. Just give us a brief background of the study, Simona.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, so I'm currently conducting an investigation on the impacts of work stress and flourishing on the turnover intention of media personnel during the pandemic. So I'm looking at what the prevalence of work stress is on media personnel and the prevalence of flourishing. So we're looking at their psychological, social, and their emotional well-being, and then also looking at their turnover intention. And ultimately, we want to see what relationships exist among those variables, especially during the pandemic, and how they influence one another.
Fantastic. Jessé, moving on to you, I just want to gauge your views on why, media practitioners are more likely to experience the psychological brunt of this pandemic.
Good morning, Nina, and good morning, everyone who is currently part of the session. Well, the COVID-19 pandemic has really affected everyone, but more so the reason why media personnel experience the brunt of this pandemic would be because of the fundamental aspects of their work, where they come into contact with a range of people and form a range of relationships with people. And their interactions commonly take place with victims and friends and family of victims experiencing some kind of crisis or a dilemma. And this ultimately results in them being exposed to potentially traumatic events in this pandemic. And this can cause them a level of trauma and cognitive changes, such as increased levels of post-traumatic stress disorder or symptoms of depression. And also the insecurity and fear of contracting the disease and anxiety will leave an impact on the psychological well-being of media personnel. And with the increased number of people that it is affecting, it's not uncommon for media practitioners to come into contact with the same story in some way or another over time. So this does have an impact on them. And this focus can lead to symptoms of burnout. And then oftentimes in our practice as therapists, we often tell our clients to minimize their exposure to.
Well, it seems we lost Jessé there. But David, while we wait for Jessé to come back, I'd like to ask you a question. What's your experience, been, and that of your colleagues within the media fraternity since COVID-19 has hit us?
I think I'd agree with Jessé. I mean, essentially, journalism can be a pretty depressing career anyway. You're exposed to a lot, and especially now with COVID-19, and just sort of an overabundance of, it's been going on now for over a year. The same thing, that repetition of it on and on and on the same subject, and it just never seems to be getting to an end. And I think that plays a role as well, in that while you deal with things, and as Jessé was saying, you talk to victims, or you talk to people who've suffered hardships, but there's almost like an end to that. That's one story, and it comes to an end, and you can try and file it away, and you can try and process it and deal with it. But whereas COVID and the entire pandemic, it's ongoing. Every day there's something new. There's something that gets added to. There's no real time to decompress, to sort through everything. Obviously, we started off sort of slow in Namibia. We were very fortunate, but now we've also had that aspect of the deaths and the increase in disease, and it no longer just being numbers, it being names, it being people that personally, and you're having to report on those things as well. So I think that, to me, definitely plays a role. And I mean, to the people I've spoken to in the industry as well, it is definitely, it's different to anything that's been dealt with before.
All right, just another question, David. I mean, from the colleagues that you mentioned, you have spoken to and interacted with concerning this. Have they said, or told you or mentioned that, because journalists usually are exposed to, the harshness of the world, and they're always reporting on, the gruesome stuff that happens around us. Has COVID-19 been any different from, the usual reporting on the grimness of the world?
I think to a point, there are different aspects to it. So like I say, it started off where a lot of our reporting was trying to get to grips and trying to explain to people exactly what COVID was, SARS-CoV-2, all the different terminologies, airborne. So there was a massive learning curve there for journalists as well, to have to figure out all of these things and figure out a way to explain to people. Then there was the element of sort of myth busting, false information, finding the correct information, getting that out to everyone. So there've been so many different elements to the entire pandemic. But as I say, I think now recently there's been a lot more of the sort of traumatic experience of it, talking to people who have lost. I mean, some of the media reports people burying 5 family members in one day, and anyone who has that little bit of empathy that starts taking on those feelings themselves, I think that starts building up quite significantly.
Just another question, David. I'm just curious. Are you of the opinion that journalists, because you said it has been such a big learning curve for everybody, learning about the virus in 2020, and just so much information coming through of this virus on a daily basis. And then, we had one strain, and now we're dealing with 3 different strains and, variants and all of that. Are journalists sufficiently educated on the topic?
It's tricky, because it's one of those that you have to almost take it on yourself. You have to decide that this is something that you're going to learn about. I mean, not necessarily every single journalist will have to. I mean, for our example here at Future Media, I compile the daily Corona Watch bulletins. So I think I've had to take on a lot more than some of our other journalists who are dealing with it and are wanting to know about it, but haven't had to go quite as in depth into it and learn as much about it. It is tricky though, because it is a subject that even the scientists are still learning about every single day. So yes, when it comes to journalists and, especially with shrinking newsrooms and not having the resources necessarily, which COVID didn't help, that actually exacerbated with sort of decreased advertising spend. Newsrooms were having to deal with decreased budgets. A lot of newsrooms had to let people go. So you had fewer staff members having to cover the workload. It's very difficult to have. I mean, Namibia, South Africa possibly has a couple. Namibia doesn't really have any sort of dedicated science journalists. So I think a lot of us have had to just take it upon ourselves to learn as much as we possibly can. There have been a lot of amazing resources, thankfully, due to the internet, due to Zoom meetings and being able to have access to people from all over the planet. So there have been a lot of science journalists, scientists, researchers who have availed themselves and made it easier for us to learn from them. But yeah, I think it's something that journalists have had to decide for themselves to do.
Simone, you're a fourth-year psychology student, and your research really could have been about anything, but you chose to delve into the well-being of, the media personnel during the COVID-19 pandemic. Just talk to us about why.
Yes, so I think it's important to expand and advance the knowledge in areas where we really see a literature gap, and that's what I saw with the media industry and media personnel, and also COVID-19 research in general. There's definitely a literature gap there, and obviously, just like everything that Mr. David just said, there's a lot of responsibility on media personnel that a lot of people don't even know about. We often overlook this sector of our economy and this industry in Namibia. And the media is also very, we come in contact with some form of media like every single day of our lives. So we shouldn't overlook its significance. And yes, so I think that's definitely what influenced my choice on research on media personnel, just because I think research is definitely lacking in that area, and especially in the Namibian context as well.
Not to, preempt your study, Simone, but just speak to us about the responses that you've received so far, because, yeah, I've also participated in it. So talk to us about what the response has been so far.
Okay, so yes, data collection is still ongoing at the moment, and we haven't done any data analysis as of yet because we're still collecting responses. But obviously, I am expecting certain responses to occur just because of what the literature has found thus far. So I'm expecting to see high levels of work stress just because of the circumstances that we're living in now, and like job insecurity and all these traumatic experiences that people are going through. So I'm definitely expecting to see high levels of work stress and low levels of flourishing, because that goes hand in hand. So if you have high work stress, then you'll have lower levels of psychological well-being and emotional well-being and social well-being. So that is what I'm expecting from the responses thus far. And I'm not too sure what I'll see with turnover intention, but I'm also expecting to see high levels of that. If work stress is high, then that will probably also be high, and vice versa. But I'm very excited to see what my findings will result in. But yes, data collection is still ongoing, so we'll have to wait until that is finished.
Fantastic. And when exactly will your data collection be done?
At the moment, I am giving it some time. Data collection has been a little bit slow at the moment. My responses haven't been coming in as quickly as I expected it to come in. So I'm keeping it going for a little bit longer, but obviously I have deadlines as well at the university. So I'm thinking it's going to be over the next month or so. I'm still going to keep the data collection open. And yes, then the project will be finished in October. So quite some while from now.
And Simona, how do you intend to utilize these findings of yours at the end of the day? And also, will they be made available to the public?
Yes, the findings will be made available to the public. So it will be published in newspaper articles and radio. And hopefully I will also get the opportunity to present my findings at a conference and publish it in an academic journal. So yes, it will be made available to the public after the project is completed and handed in. And then anyone can access the findings and the research. So obviously it can be utilized by media personnel themselves, by managers and just media companies to develop interventions and plans to enhance the well-being of their personnel and also to think of ways to help them lower their work stress. So I think it can be very valuable for media personnel, and also ultimately you learn more about human behavior and how we respond to trauma and difficult circumstances like the pandemic. So yeah, there are many ways that we can utilize the findings, and obviously the findings will also contribute to the literature on COVID-19 and work stress and flourishing and turnover intention.
All right. David, how do how would you suggest journalists, find the balance in the midst of all that is happening? As you mentioned, reporting on COVID-19 is pretty different. Yes, journalists are used to reporting on, the negative things that happen in the world. But with COVID-19, you possibly are also losing a loved one, very close loved one. And you have to report on this matter on a daily basis. There's a term called COVID fatigue that people use. And it's not only for the general public, I think, where, people stop wearing their masks and, don't adhere to regulations as much as they should. They don't social distance as much as they should because we're really just tired of the pandemic. But I think it can also be used in terms of expressing, the fact that when you speak about it all the time, as journalists have to do, and you speak about this every single day, it can also be termed as COVID fatigue. So what are some of the things that journalists can do to find balance, practical ways to find balance in the midst of everything that's happening?
I think Jessé, if she was still with us, would have probably been better qualified to sort of answer this kind of question. But I think it's just managing to, trying to find that balance, trying to find that downtime, perhaps forcing yourself to have that break, to get away from it. One of the problems, especially these days, not just with COVID itself and reporting on COVID, is just the 24-hour availability. I mean, you've got Twitter, you've got Facebook, you've got WhatsApp. It's a never-ending stream of information that's coming your way, and you need to actually force yourself sometimes to just say no, take a break, switch it off, go for a walk around the block, leave the phone at home. Exercise is always obviously a good thing, and I mean, psychologists will also sort of explain to people that getting some exercise, being active, and I think calling on your support structures, it's getting easier. I mean, looking even just today with Simone Biles, the US Olympian, pulling out of the final to focus on her mental health, it's getting easier for people to speak about mental health. I think getting easier for people to actually say, I'm not coping. Whereas, previously it would almost be frowned upon, or if you're not coping, then you're just too soft, especially in the journalistic field, that old school, hardened, grizzled journalist who had to be able to take anything and carry on. it's getting more acceptable for people to say, listen, I'm struggling, I need a bit of a break. And I think that's where your support structures come in, your family, your friends, and just taking that time to look after yourself as well.
And what do you do practically to keep your head above the waters?
I like to cycle, so I get on my bicycle, and I possibly push myself a little bit too hard on the bicycle just to clear everything out. But that works for me. Cycling, running, taking the dogs for a walk, spending time with my wife and my son. Just those sort of small things.
All right. Well, personally, I've decided I don't speak about COVID-19 unless I'm getting paid to do it. Otherwise, it does become overwhelming if it's a daily task. Simone, I just wanted to know, a lot of workplaces don't believe in exercising occupational wellness. Do you think that the findings from your research, could help certain places of employment? Are you planning perhaps to have them utilize it, to give it to them, to look at and to sort of implement? Do you have any plans of that nature?
Well, yes, definitely. I think occupational wellness is something that people can't avoid anymore because it's affecting every single person, no matter where you work, if you work in the media industry or not. And it's very important as well. And so I think I'll definitely share my findings with media companies and anyone who's interested, really, so that they can see what the impacts of COVID-19 is and on their workers, and maybe they can develop ways to increase occupational wellness in the workplace. Okay, my research supervisor's hand is up, so I'm guessing he also wants to add something to this, if that's all right, Dr.
Yes. Not a problem at all. Wesley, good morning. I'm actually glad to see you joined us. I was going to engage you just now. So please do go ahead.
Good morning, Nina, and thank you for the opportunity. Just to add on to what the speakers was already saying, I think David also touched on this. The other day, a colleague spoke about how he needed to report on a motor vehicle accident. And it wasn't like the person was carried in the body bag, but it was like the person was scraped from the pavements, from the tarmac. And I'm just thinking, if I had to observe something like that, I will not be functioning 100% anymore. And I think that's the idea, speaking from different journalists, media personnel, that is basically the world that they live in. And I don't think that the media industry is doing enough to take care of the well-being of their employees. You would also see a lot of people, and I'm not talking about us that regard ourselves a little bit higher than the functioning alcoholics that do make use of prescription medication, over-the-counter medication, just to function on a daily basis. And I'm not specifically only talking about the media industry. I think many organizations is an unhealthy place to work in. And this is also, we regard our human resources, our employees, to be the biggest or the most important resource, but we're not taking care of them enough. And you would find these functioning alcoholics at work, these people hooked on prescription medication just to survive. But as we all know, that's not the way, that's not a sustainable way of dealing with this. And this is also what you were alluding to, Nina, about the need and the importance of workplace wellness. Some organizations are catching on within Namibia, and that's good to see. But I do think that organizations can still do a lot more to take care of employees. And this is what we've seen, and it's not documented within the media personnel. And that's why I was so thankful for Simone to choose this specific sample to work on with, because I've had this idea of wanting to look at the well-being of media personnel, because you would find that people are suffering a lot, and there's not a lot of scientific evidence about this. And I think the only way that we can start to improve the situation is if we conduct these studies. And like what David is saying, it's becoming a profession that it's not a very attractive profession, but somebody needs to do it. And with the changes of COVID-19, I'm thinking about now the print media. Everything is online now. People need to start having more digital skills. And all of that adds to the work stress of media personnel, because working in print industry, it's like your job is becoming in jeopardy. So now you're not just only worried about the pandemic, losing a loved one, you're also now concerned about your own job security. You're also concerned about how you would be able to provide for your family and at the same time do a half decent job at work. And with all of these changes, the media industry is also suffering. How do they still manage? Because a lot of people are not no longer buying the newspapers to read up on all of these updates. It's available online all time, every time. And this is also why you would see, how do they still make money to pay for their employees and still manage within the COVID-19 pandemic? And just to conclude, something that you're talking about, Nina, the COVID fatigue. These days, you even see people having compassion fatigue. It's like when someone talks about, I've lost my brother, and people are, oh, okay, that's good. I'm sorry for your loss. Let's move on. People don't have that anymore, because I think with the pandemic, we're also experiencing compassion fatigue, where we inherently do care, but it's so exhausting that it's something that becomes every day if you hear about someone dying. Thank you for that.
Sure. I couldn't agree with you more on the compassion fatigue, and it desensitizes one to an extent. You get tired of, giving condolences. Yeah, I don't know, David, is that also your personal experience, one? And secondly, I don't want to put your employer on the spot or you on the spot here, but I just want to know, does Future, where you are employed, do you have any occupational wellness strategies implemented for the employees, specifically during this time?
Yeah, well, I mean, with the compassion, I think this is the kind of, I caught myself a couple of years back. There's some stories that I just don't want to have to do. I don't want to have to say the words that are in those stories. The person who wrote them has already had to deal with that trauma, but you do find yourself getting desensitized anyway. You're exposed. The people who are listening to the news are hearing certain stories. The people who are reading the newspapers are hearing certain stories, but a lot of the journalists are seeing all of those stories and more. It's kind of, you can take a certain number of stories and you can shut off. You can decide to not carry on watching the 24-hour news channel on TV, or turn off the radio news, or not buy the newspaper that day. But it's our job to every day expose ourselves to all of those things. So even when you're not necessarily on the front line of it, you are being exposed to it, and it is constantly sort of getting in and desensitizing you. And like I say, I caught myself a couple of years back, almost seeing a story and going, well, that there weren't that many people that died, so it isn't that big a story. And you kind of, you feel bad about that, but that is at the same time the reality, unfortunately, because of everything that you're exposed to. And with COVID to a point as well, I think there is there's a necessary, we talk about desensitization, and I don't think it's something that journalists are necessarily choosing to do. You're not choosing to be hard and to not care, but a lot of the time it can be a defense strategy, because you need to block yourself off. Because if you do take everything on, you're not going to be able to survive. You're going to burn out and break down and need to get away from everything. So yeah, I think desensitization is definitely, it's something that's always happened in this field. And I think when it comes to COVID-19, that's no exception. It's definitely happening there as well. We see death numbers every day. We're seeing, the Ministry of Health is putting out numbers, and you start weighing them up and you're like, oh, well, okay, not as many as yesterday, but those are still people that have died, and it's still tragic. As far as Future Media, we don't necessarily have sort of structured interventions in place as far as employee wellness and workplace wellness. We've got an open, I'd say more of an open communication structure. The CEO is very available. Everyone's very available. My team knows if they've got issues, they can come and chat. And there is compassion within the organization, but there's no actual sort of structured workplace wellness program as yet.
A while ago, while talking to one of my friends who are also a media practitioner, and I said to them, I think that we would all need some sort of therapy once, COVID-19 is done. But I think that we need it now more than ever. We shouldn't actually wait until, the pandemic has blown over. Simone, back to you. I just wanted to, I can't remember some of the questions that you asked now in your survey, but perhaps you can just take us through the type of questioning that you have in there. And also before you answer, Simone, to our participants, if anybody has a question for Simone or for David, please just raise your hand. Also on our social media, you can just leave your comments underneath the live post, and we will post them to David and Simone. I wish that Jessé was with us now, because I think the psychological aspect of what we're talking about is also very, very important. But over to you, Simone.
So the questionnaire is quite lengthy, but so it's divided into 3 sections, and one section measures work stress, one section measures flourishing, and the other one turnover intention. So some of the questions that you'll come across if you are participating in the survey, one of the questions is how often in the past few months have you felt upset, felt happy, things like that. So it asks questions about your emotions as well. And then specifically, there are questions like how often in the past few months have you felt like that you're being fulfilled in your workplace and felt excited about your work. So I feel like those questions that really target work stress and well-being and components like that. Especially the questions about work stress and those questions about, do you feel excited about your work? Do you feel enthusiastic about your work during the past few weeks or the past few months? That especially targets the time since COVID started, and it makes it very specific to COVID. So yes, there are a lot of questions in the survey. And it also asks questions about, with turnover intention specifically, it asks questions like, how often have you felt like leaving your work or leaving the profession, and questions related to leaving your job or your profession is also in there. Also, if there are companies here or people who are part of media personnel and they haven't completed the survey yet, then you can definitely send me an email, or you can drop your email in the chat box and I'll send the request to you. And then you can also have the opportunity to participate in the survey and see the questions for yourselves as well, if you would be interested in participating in the survey. Obviously, if you are media personnel, then the survey will just be for your benefit, because perhaps your workplace can then take those findings and develop an occupational wellness program or something like that to enhance people's mental health at work during the pandemic.
David, have you taken the survey?
No, it's the first I've heard of it actually. So I'll definitely get in touch, and I'll get all our people to take part.
Just quickly going back to what I said about, needing therapy, because, not everybody has access to it, to therapy, media professionals included. There have been, word about, some media professionals or journalists self-medicating in order to deal with the stress and depression around, this pandemic. Are media employees taking note of this? And have you heard anything of that nature?
I don't think I've seen it sort of in our team. I've heard murmurings and I've heard people talking about how, there is definitely, and I mean, if we look at journalism, it's always been seen as that kind of profession where, like I say, we spoke about the grizzled old journalist who probably always drank a bit too much. Nowadays there are other methods. It's not just alcohol that some people resort to, and I'm sure that there are definitely a lot of unhealthy coping mechanisms in the journalism field. I think possibly right across the board in every sort of field, every discipline. In Namibia, I don't think there's any industry that doesn't have a lot of stress at the moment, and that people aren't dealing with all sorts of additional stresses due to COVID-19. So I think, unfortunately, there probably is quite a lot of unhealthy coping mechanisms being resorted to right across the board in Namibia.
All right. Well, as I mentioned earlier, the psychological aspect of this conversation is very important. Hopefully we can have a part 2 where we can thoroughly sort of pick Jessé's brain around this. But just in conclusion, Simone, I'd like to hear from you. And when you're done, Wesley, I'd also like you to just say something in conclusion, and then David will end with you.
Okay, well, first of all, I just want to thank Namibia Media Trust for inviting my research supervisor and I to talk on this platform today. It was really a fun experience, and I really appreciate it. And I really hope my research will help to make the media industry more aware of what's going on, what the impact is of COVID-19 on the mental health of journalists and all media personnel, really. And I really hope there will come something of it, and that my research will not be in vain, and that people will learn something out of my research. That would be really great. And thank you for your participation in my research. If you already have, I really appreciate your contribution, and it's highly valuable to me. Thank you.
Wesley, I just would like for you to say something in conclusion as well.
Thank you, Nina. Thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for inviting us. Just maybe on a way moving forward, I know David mentioned that some organizations don't have a set structure in place for managing employee wellness. And I think maybe it's also upon us as individual employees to see what we can do to manage the different stresses that we are facing. Just some hints from my side would be to have boundaries in place. I know our work life is now meshed and mixed. Working from home, you need to be available most of the time on your phones. And I think, like what you were saying, there's also a time where you just need to take a break from all of this to regenerate and recharge your own batteries, because I don't think you would be able to effectively do what you need to do if you don't also have some time to unwind and relax. Just some other time management. We all know where the stresses are coming from, and if we can manage that a little bit better, that will also help us with the added challenges of COVID-19, just to manage our lives a little bit better. And the 4 main things around our health and well-being, the way that I see it, is sleep. Always try to prioritize our sleep. Diet, what you have, what you take in, make sure that you're eating healthy. Exercise, even if it's just for 30, 45 minutes, even if it's just walking the dog. And last but not least, look after your own psychological well-being, mental well-being. And I think a lot of it has also to do with how we see things. I don't think everything in life is a crisis, and I don't think that we need to respond to everything happening. And like what he was also saying is that sometimes it's just needed for you to take a step back and just deal with what you can at the moment, and know what your resources are available to manage within these difficult times. Thank you.
Very, very good advice there, Wesley. Thank you so much. David, firstly, you really need to take the survey. The questions are very, very, insightful. And, you also have a lot of introspection while answering those questions. I mean, questions like, how often have you thought about leaving your job? I was surprised at how many times I've done that, and more so in the last 2 years. But it's just your last remarks this morning, David.
I think I just sort of, again, to agree with what Wesley was saying there. And I think that is sort of the most important, especially for media personnel in this 24-hour news cycle, is to just make sure you do have that time where you turn off and have that work-life balance and say, I don't have to know about everything that's happening. And it's hard as journalists. You want to be on top of these things. That's why you're in this field, in this profession. You want to know what's going on at all times. But to just force yourself to say, right, it's done now. Now's time for me. Read a book, watch a movie, go for a walk. Just take some downtime. So I think that's definitely very, very important, especially for media personnel. I mean, for anyone, but especially for media personnel.
All right. Well, thank you so much, David and Simone, for joining us this morning. Thank you for your time. And Wesley, thank you so much for your contribution as well. I'm really looking forward to see what the final, data will be of the survey when it is done. And also just a reminder to our viewers that if you would like to get a copy of the survey or participate in it, if you are within the media fraternity, you can email Simone at fourie.simi@gmail.com, and you can also get the survey from Wesley. His email address is wpeters@unam.na. Well, we've come to the end of today's session. Thank you once again, everybody. Have a lovely day.
The Ask the Experts platform is a monthly segment that offers an opportunity for Namibian journalists to engage noted experts in one-on-one discussions on the COVID-19 pandemic. Journalists get to pose questions to experts in various sectors to ensure that they are equipped with the necessary information to better inform their readers, listeners, and viewers. COVID-19 is our common enemy. Together, we can defeat it. Proudly brought to you by the Namibia Media Trust and the DW Academy.